Hi, welcome to Grit Podcast. Now, no longer a podcast. We have moved to the big screen. We are now a TV show. Whoop whoop.
Yay!
All right. Once again, I'm Tyler Bass,
I'm Rhea Sawant.
Gabby Doctor.
Ian Zalawa.
and once again, we're going to be talking about The Color of Water, a black man's tribute to his white mother by James McBride. It is a New York Times bestseller. The Washington Post said it is as lively as a novel, a well-written, thoughtful contribution to literature on race. So, it is also the winner of the National Book Award. Very prestigious award. And first, let's start off by asking how everybody's doing. How are we all today?
I'm doing good.
Good.
I'm doing great.
Doing good.
I also am doing good. Had a great day today.
I'll start off then. Okay, so this book is basically, for the second part of the book, we've already discussed the first part in our podcast. And so now the book shifts toward a more inclusive perspective of each individual's life, which is Ruth's and James McBride's life. So within the second part of the book, James McBride follows the story of how his stepfather, Hunter Jordan, dies. So we start off a chapter called Daddy, and it follows how Hunter Jordan was seen through all the 12 kids that he had with Ruth McBride Jordan. So then after that chapter, we see his death and how it impacts the rest of the family, and from that we can see how specifically James McBride starts falling, but not only James McBride, how Ruth also starts crumbling. Her once strong statue was broken down because she had suffered through the deaths of her first husband and now her second husband, Hunter Jordan. And with James McBride, you see him rebelling, dropping out of school, dealing with drugs, mugging from old women. You can see how the death of the stepfather, Hunter Jordan, really impacts the whole family within this second part of the book. You also see that in Ruth's perspective as a young Jewish girl, you see her grow as an individual as she goes through an abortion. She's dating this black man named Pete who she loves, but then she goes to New York and she finds a sense of individuality, and she really starts to grow, starts making opinions and decisions about herself, starts almost rebelling against her parents because she wants to graduate and she wants to leave Suffolk, Virginia, to go to New York also. So this whole second part of the book is a time of change and growth.
Great summary of the middle third of the book, which goes up until around page
I think
186.
186. Yes. So that's what we'll be discussing today. Pages 95, 96 to 187. So starting off with some of the themes Gabby just discussed there, change, James rebelling after his father passed. Although those are themes being talked about in the book during a pastime, these are also themes that are very relevant in modern society as well, as we have, as you can see every day, people without a positive role model in their lives or a positive father figure to kind of help raise them, definitely can have more difficulties growing up than people who have someone sort of to guide them on the right path. And we can see this happen to James as he goes down. He begins mugging people and dealing drugs, and he drops out of school. A bunch of really poor decisions he's made are because of this.
Specifically talking about that scene, I really want us to focus on the importance of that scene, because during his rebellion phase, he mugs and he steals and he robs, but specifically he robs an old woman. And if you remember from part 1 of the book, his mother was being robbed from an older man, two black men who laughed in their faces and ran away. And so the same thing happened, but instead James is the one who's doing the mugging. So he robs an old woman, takes her purse and takes her money after she gets off a bus stop, and he becomes the man that robs a woman and then runs away laughing. So I want to focus on the importance of that, because it's like he becomes what he once feared. his mother was in a position in which she was a victim of harassment, of discrimination because she's white in a black neighborhood. But now James McBride is put into a position in which he's the one who's committing these vile acts. He's the one who's being aggressive to other people. He becomes what he once feared would happen to his mother. He becomes almost he becomes the villain almost.
Yes.
And it seems as if he's like trying to get away from his problems by making bad decisions, like on page 147 where he says, "I turned 15 on the corner but could act like I was 25, and no one cared. I could hide. No one knew me. No one knew my past, my white mother, my dead father, nothing. It was perfect. My problems seemed far, far away." It just says that like with what he was doing now, he could just throw away what he was before and just forget about it, and it didn't affect how he did that now. So
Yeah, and then I also wanted Abby include in something that like Gabby kind of showed, like something in the past and then like presently what's going on right now. So like James was he's going through like a rebellion phase, and it's also shown on Ruth's side when she was like a teenager. She was doing rebellious things also, like she was dating people that her parents didn't want to, and like you can kind of see that James goes through the same thing. He's going through a rebellious phase. He's doing drugs and doing stuff that like he shouldn't be doing.
Okay, so then also throughout this whole time, I noticed that the second part of the book really focused on New York. So I really want to ask you guys, like, what do you think New York could be? Like, what does it mean in this book as of right now?
Well, I think New York, especially during this time, was really a melting pot of different cultures and races and such going on there, which I think is exemplified by the ability of Ruth to transition there in such a, I don't want to say easy, but the way that she did transition, she was able to go there and make a life, which just goes to show, New York at this time was very, it was just a mixing pot of different peoples coming together, migrating there. It was really a hub of America at the time, and still is, and is exemplified through Ruth's ability to travel there.
And it said that in the book. It also said that New York, because the life is just so busy. Yeah, so busy, people didn't really care about your race, or about your religion, or about how different you were. So if you were Jewish, it didn't matter. If you were black, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if you were different, because the place was so busy, everyone was going on with their lives, they focused on themselves. So it's kind of like...
I think that's shown great when he asked his mother when he was young, "Am I black or white?" And then she says, "You're a human being, educate yourself or you'll be a nobody."
Right.
And it shows that that's how, because he's young, he doesn't understand how it works yet, and she just is trying to like guide him, and this shows that like nobody really cares what you are there. It's just
You're you.
Yeah.
So I also thought that New York was also important because it was for James during the death of his stepfather, which is basically his only father figure of his time. New York became a place of freedom. Because
like almost a place of escape,
Right, because he escapes from his sad, unbearable, broken down reality, and he just can't bear the death of his stepfather gone, the only father figure in his life. And with that, he just stops dropping entirely. His grades drop, he stops going to school, he doesn't care anymore, he starts dealing with drugs, he starts robbing, he starts going into that like a downward spiral, and it's just
a black hole.
Yeah,
exactly. I think that's a very good point you brought up about how he uses New York as kind of an escape from his own reality, and you can see that Ruth also did that when she became pregnant.
Right.
Instead of being able, she knew that she would be persecuted by her family and looked down upon by the surrounding community if she was found out to be pregnant, found out to be pregnant by a black man, and then had the baby in general. All of these things would have been horrible for her life in Virginia. And so she decides to pack herself up and go to New York, and that transition again is very impactful to the story, because that, as James also uses New York as an escape, Ruth also uses New York as an escape from her own reality, which she doesn't enjoy.
right.
Yeah, like the two structures when they show like Ruth's side of the story and then James' side of the story, it's like almost like they're parallels, because these
Definitely,
stories
yeah.
have like really similar things, and like you can see how they both grow up and see like how they're so similar.
And I would like to mention, because if you notice when we're reading the chapters, like almost each chapter is a parallel to another. Like there was a chapter where we talked about boys, okay? And then the next chapter, I think from James McBride's perspective, talked about another boy or a man, his father figure. So while Ruth in her past young life is talking about her dating life, her growing, her social, being with an environment of boys, James McBride talks about the one influential man in his life, or one of many influential men in his life, that really shapes how he thought. So each chapter, I think, does have some sort of relation and parallel to each other.
Also, I think a reason that he went down that downward spiral that he did, where he started doing all the bad things, was because he didn't have the father figure in his life to guide him and tell him the good choices to make.
Because he was gone.
I think all that repressed anger made him start doing all those actions, and he couldn't really express himself, so that was the option he went towards.
And then continuing down that, obviously he did go through a really bad time in his life, you know, as we've said a couple times, the drugs, the dropping out of school, but he manages to finally bring himself back around, and he does this through Christ, through God. He seeks salvation or help from God. He really tries to turn his life around through the help of religion and Christ and the Christian faith.
So from that, like, what can we say about religion? How it really impacts these people through their hard times?
Like, then again, I think it kind of shows like the parallelism, like when his mom turned into like a Christian, and it showed like how she found it so significant. Like, I think this is James's point where he figures that like he needs God, and God is going to be so helpful.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because for Ruth, she was originally a Jew. So she followed Jewish Orthodox. She practiced their traditions, did their customs. There was a point in the book where she couldn't even enter a Gentile, a Protestant church, because she was a Jew. And that scene is so important because after Hunter Jordan dies, James McBride's stepfather, all she could do is go to a church, a Christian Protestant church, to find some sort of relief, to alleviate the pain that she's feeling with the death of her second husband.
I feel like that's a good point you brought up there about how, well, going back to your question about what religion kind of plays in the role of these people, we see both Ruth and James both turn to religion when in times of distress or when they're lost as people. We see that, you know, Ruth goes after Hunter Jordan has passed away and goes to the church and really just tries to seek help through faith. And James also ends up doing this. He really tries to center himself around a faith and fill the hole that was left by the death of his stepfather, where he was lacking guidance for a while as he was making all those poor decisions, and then really uses religion and Christianity and God to fill that hole within him.
Right. And through this time of change, it's also like a time of like everything is crashing, because Ruth not only experiences the death of her husband, she also experiences the death of her best friend Irene. And I want to branch on that, because how do you guys feel about like someone's losing not only the husband but the best friend, in which they only believe that they only get one or two good friends in their whole entire life? And Irene, there's a scene in the book where Irene was known to Ruth as one of those friends that just never, that are just always with you. And so I just want to know what you guys have input on that.
Well, I thought it was like, first of all, like Ruth has already lost like so many other close people, like her brother, and then on top of this, she was just like losing like, you know, her husband and her like close friends. So it obviously like made like the reader have like pity on her, because she's been going through so much, and on top of that, she's like a white person that married like, you know, a black man. So obviously in this book there's like a lot of pity going on.
I think the reason that she's so strong in her religion is because no matter how many people she loses, that's always there. It's like it never is gonna go away. That's why she's like, I think she always goes to that when she's in a rough time.
I feel she uses that as like an anchor just because of that, because it's something that can't go away. She's had so much taken away from her. You know, her innocence as a child was taken when she was molested at a young age by her father, and then once again her first husband is taken from her second husband taken from her best friend taken from her. All of these things are being removed from her life, but the one thing that remains constant throughout the equation is religion and her faith.
I want to expose more on that, because Ruth never really experienced like true affection from her family. She was sexually abused from her dad. Her mother couldn't really do much for her because she was disabled with polio and she just had so many disabilities. She just couldn't do much. And then her brother went insane. Well, not insane, but he ran away from home. And so he just wasn't that older brother figure. And then her sister, her sister was just very young. But the only three people she cared about was her mother, her younger sister, and I think her grandmother, Bube. But like she never really experienced that affectionate love that a family should get because of Jewish Orthodox. They're very strict, they're very customary, stick to the rules. And so from that, like even her family relatives in New York, her aunts were very closed off from her. They were very isolated. They didn't really establish a close relationship. And so she really never got that affection that you would from a family. But with her relationship with God that she was shown by Andrew McBride, she really had that anchor that was stable, that was steady. And I think that's why religion is also another point factor in this book.
As you said, she doesn't have many good relationships
Right.
growing up from her dad, what he did, and then her mom being like caring about her, but really couldn't do anything. But she also couldn't make many friends because of how she was white and black, so neither of them like mixed with her because she was part of the other one. So it was really hard for her to find a friend that even wanted to hang out with her or be with her.
Which plays on a major theme of the book, which is racism, and how you said there, Ruth is not really accepted by either one of the two races there, the whites or the blacks. She's kind of dotting the middle there, and because of that, she's not accepted by either one, which is a horrible thing to not be accepted, especially as a child trying to make friends in such an influential period of your life. To really be regarded as garbage or being tossed aside without having many people caring for you is something really awful to have to deal with. But I think that as a child also helped mold her into the person she is today, which is why she put such an emphasis on the things she did, such as family and a close-knit family, and we don't need anybody else, we have each other.
Right.
That's all we need.
Also, I think the way that she was affected how James viewed the world, because it says here that like as a child he became aware that his mother was different from others around him, from dealing with the bus stop and with the Black Panther bus incident. And then when he would ask her about it, she would just reply, "God made me," and just like stuff that wouldn't really give him answers. So he never really understood his mom, but that's because she went through so much. She didn't want to expose him to all the troubles of the world when he was that young.
Right. Because the family was very private. Like even from the beginning of the book, we've known that they kept to themselves. They isolate themselves from the world, and so I think that's really important. And back to what you said about friendship. Besides Irene's death, we all know that Ruth had a very special friend when she was younger. Her name was Frances, and she's just such a key part of her relationship, her childhood, because Frances was that one friend. Like throughout all the discrimination for being a Jew, even though she was white, throughout all that discrimination, Frances was that girl who didn't leave her. She was that girl, that person that stayed next to her, even though she was just so different. So I want to know what your thoughts are about Frances herself. Like, what, as a character, would she be? Like, what does she mean?
I think she means the world to Ruth, obviously, because of all the things that we've said. You know, she has all these things taken from her, and you brought up that very good point about how Frances is there. Again, she's a pillar for Ruth, as she is always present. She, as a friend, is there for her, and that's as a child and then growing up, Ruth didn't really have a lot of people in her corner, so to say, and it was really, really good to have a strong person like Frances there for her.
Yeah, it could be like someone that she could rely on during her hard times because she went through so much during her childhood. So she could finally trust someone, you know, for that part of the time.
So
and
then,
like vent out her anger.
right. So then, like, what do you think Ruth's relationship with Frances, like, how did that impact her later life?
Wow, that is a hard-hitting question right there. So, how it impacted her later in life?
Yeah.
Well, I think that also attributes to how, although she did not have many relationships,
right.
the relationships she did have were extremely strong. Like the one with
the pastor also.
Exactly.
The church.
Exactly. Yes. The connections she does make with people when she makes them are very strong, but it's very hard for her to let you in, so to say, because she has had so many people just leave her or mistreat her or not do her right.
Okay. So then after such an extensive narrowing or breakdown of Ruth, let's like move on to James McBride's life. So like James McBride was born into a family of 12 kids total. So then with that, I want to mention like the social order that was established in the family, and in the later part of the book, in the second part of the book, that social order started to break down. So I want to know what your thoughts on the social order was about that.
Well, the social order being that the oldest child.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure that we were on the same page. Yeah, as a, I believe different people within the family had to really start stepping up. Like James, for example, they really had to, as time went on, and it wasn't just based on who's oldest gets to make the decisions and such. As people started to mold and shape into the people that they were going to be, people had to step up, and James, being one of them, I believe he really did a job of stepping up after he came back around from his rebellious phase. During that rebellious phase, he was not a good role model for anyone in his family, anyone looking up to him. He was not a good example of what you want to be as a person. And but after he comes around from that and really centers himself again with a religion, he becomes a good role model.
Yeah, I think he had that realization that he wasn't doing the right thing. He had to change it for him and his family, and then he looked to God also for that, for comfort and guidance. And then that's when he got into jazz and like fell in love with that, which later he had this like the skill but not the scores to get into Oberian College in Ohio, and he did, surprisingly to everyone there, and he just carried on with what he loved and did the right thing instead of what he was doing before.
Yeah, and I want to go back to that. Like when James was growing up, he was always like, the house was always filled with his older siblings, and they would always come back like Dennis, like all the smart siblings, and then he would always like write in like the previous section of the book like his experiences with them and how they were always like intelligent, and they were like the favorite, like the model child that you usually see. And then like when it's his turn and he's like the oldest one in the household in his rebellious phase, like he's never in the house, he's just out doing other stuff. But when he comes back, like Tyler said, like he definitely like improved and saw what he did wrong and like improved him from his actions.
Right. And so really during this time, James McBride does go through his rebellion phase, and the social order that I was talking about, the family hierarchy basically, that's what kept the family in balance, kept the family together and united, because everyone followed this set rules, and the family was just it was balanced. But now after one member died, the stepfather, who was barely even there, he only came on the weekends. When his death came upon the family, it broke almost every wall, every structure that was set up and established, and it broke the whole family, which happens because when a death of a family member happens, your whole life changes. And for the McBride family, the whole balance just crumbled down. The social order that was set up by Ruth, the mother, was no more. It started tearing apart, it started breaking down. Ruth herself started breaking down when James kept on coming from school, just not coming from school, but he would come from somewhere else, the place, because it wasn't until later that she found out that he's been skipping school all this time, that his grades were faked. Yeah, and they were slipping too. They were faked also, but with help by his friend Vincent. And so with that, you just see how the whole family is just falling apart. And I think it's really sad how Ruth, the pedestal of strength and courage and just a strong woman, she herself started breaking down too. Because after the death of her second husband, I don't think she could ever fall in love again.
Like trust that it would stay there, be permanent.
And even their house, like it wasn't as clean. It was kind of more like just like go around the house, like they weren't cleaning it as much, and it was kind of like you could see even the house was falling apart, kind of just as the family was falling apart.
And then I found a quote that kind of this time period in their lives represents a rock bottom, so to say, I believe,
exactly.
of like a combination of things that have just caused the worst events towards them. You have the death of the stepfather, and because of that, James runs off and starts acting crazy, and all of these things put together. And here's a quote about how he talks about repeatedly, for example, he says he sees the Eyewitness News and it goes, talks about the dangers of being hooked on marijuana, and he says, I'd laugh. You can't get hooked on reefer, I told my friends. I can stop anytime I want. But deep inside, I knew I was hooked, and I was secretly jealous of those from my drug circle who got themselves together and pulled out. So deep down, he knows what he's doing is wrong. He knows that, like, as we talked about, he's not being a good example for his younger siblings, and then he's just not being a good person. He's not being the person that Ruth raised him to be.
Right.
And he knows that he should be pulling out, but just he gets stuck in this vicious cycle of waking up, getting high, going to bed, waking up, getting high, going to bed. It consumes his life. As he says here, I wanted to give up weed, but I couldn't. Weed was my friend. Weed kept me running from the truth, and the truth was my mother was falling apart.
Yeah, and I also think that this whole entire like black hole and this like whole entire like rock bottom thing, like Tyler said, like deep inside he wanted to like stop doing weed and he wanted to get out. Like it was kind of like a cry for help, like really deep inside, but he couldn't because he was like all his repressed feelings of like his father dying and then everything in general. It just like made him do these actions.